Good evening, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber, and welcome to Prime Crime Tonight. This is where we do a deeper dive into the most high-profile and memorable true crime cases. Tonight, lies, an affair, and 3 shocking murders.
August 13th, 2018, Frederick, Colorado. Security footage captures Shanann Watts, a pregnant mother of 2, returning home from a business trip. 3 days later, the dead bodies of Shanann and her 4-year-old daughter Bella and 3-year-old daughter Celeste would be found by police. From the outside, Shanann had an idyllic life. She was married to Chris Watts, a man she described as the best thing that ever happened to her. The young couple had 2 daughters and were expecting their 3rd child.
So pink means...
That's just the test.
I know. It just says the pink is going to be girls.
I don't know.
What we've since learned, though, is that there were deep cracks in this picture-perfect family.
Thank you so much for coming out here with me, Christopher. I'm having a wonderful time. You mean a lot to me.
At the time of Shanann's pregnancy announcement, Chris was having an affair with coworker Nicole Kessinger. The relationship was documented by photos, videos, and racy pictures. The Watts marriage would soon become strained, with texts revealing Shanann thought Chris was being distant. Shanann told a friend she planned to speak to her husband after her trip. Instead, later in the day, Shanann and her daughters are reported missing when a friend can't get a hold of her.
No sign of a mother and her 2 young daughters who disappeared early Monday afternoon. 34-year-old Shanann Watts is 15 weeks pregnant.
Chris says his wife and kids left while he was at work, but never came back. He even turns to the media, pleading on TV for his family's safe return.
Shanann, Bella, Celeste, if you're out there, just come back. Like, if somebody has her, just please bring her back.
But a neighbor's surveillance video tells a different story. After failing a lie detector test and police narrowing down their focus,
Chris, you gotta tell us. There's something that happened to these baby girls. Look at them.
I know.
Chris Watts admits to strangling Shanann to death, but claims she killed the kids. His confession led authorities to an oil work site where Shanann was buried in a shallow grave and Bella and Celeste discarded in oil tanks. Watts would ultimately claim responsibility for the murder of his daughters and plead guilty to 9 charges, including 5 counts of murder.
Perhaps the most inhumane and vicious crime that I have handled out of the thousands of cases that I have seen.
He was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms in prison. Unfortunately, this is not the end of this tragic tale. The public wouldn't learn more of the story until later on, when Watts sat down for a 5-hour interview revealing new and disturbing details of the killings.
What's wrong?
But the question still lurking in people's minds is, why would a seemingly ordinary man choose to brutally murder his wife and children in cold blood?
Hi.
Say hi.
Hello.
You don't want to say hi?
Let's start with one of the most analyzed and controversial moments in the case, when Chris Watts, knowing full well what he did, speaks with Denver 7, a local media outlet, the day after his family goes missing, and he pleads for their safe return.
Right now, I don't even want to just throw anything out there. I hope that she's somewhere safe right now and with the kids. But I mean, could she just taken off? I don't know. But if somebody has her and they're not safe, I want them back now. That's what's in my head. If they're safe right now, they're gonna come back. But if they're not safe right now, that's the not knowing part. If they're not safe, last night I had every light in the house on. I was hoping that I would just ran over by the kids running in the door and just barrel rushing me, but it didn't happen. And it was just a traumatic night trying to be here.
All right, I want to bring in New York Law School professor and retired New York City detective Kirk Burkhalter and forensic scientist and professor of forensic psychology Jennifer Shen. Kirk, I want to start with you. If you were investigating this case and you see him do that, what would be your thought there? What catches your eye about that interview?
Well, certainly there are a couple of things here that catch my eye. One is the use of the first person singular. So, in other words, his interview with his responses, he focused a lot on himself, how he felt, what his expectations would be, that he would like to see them come home, and didn't refer as often to their well-being and safety. So you can think if a loved one is missing, that's what they would refer to. Also, the fact that he's alone and somewhat devoid of emotion. But the first person singular, what he wanted, what he wished, that's what he focused on. That's really what struck me first.
A lot of people are asking why. So Jennifer, explain to us the thought process here of Watts. Why would someone in his position go on TV and do this?
Well, honestly, it's because it's what's expected. When your family goes missing, then that is what is expected, that you'll go to the media, you'll work with police, you'll be out there in front of the cameras saying, please, 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 pleading to bring them back. And I mean, I agree with the assessment that he was very devoid of emotion, very first-person oriented, and you just watch him and you just absolutely don't believe anything he's saying. And I thought it was very clear in this particular instance.
Well, I want to move on to another dramatic moment in this case, and there are a ton of them. Chris's initial alibi was that Shanann and the kids left and disappeared while he was at work. But what Chris didn't realize was that his neighbor's security camera caught him loading his truck at 5:27 a.m. He's the only one on tape leaving that house, so it disproves his story. And I want you to watch carefully to Chris's reaction when his neighbor plays the footage, not just for him, but also a police officer that was there as well.
What else can I do with this?
You think he looks nervous? Now here's something interesting. When the neighbor shut down the replay, his TV went back to a normal broadcast. But I want you to look very carefully at what appears on the screen, and maybe more importantly, what Chris says.
Diesel.
You're good.
Yeah, I thought nothing.
Nothing for the rest of the day?
No, that's it.
She's pregnant as well.
How far along?
15 weeks.
Now he should mention that Shanann was pregnant. Investigators say that in that 26-minute period, he was loading the truck up with Shanann's body and his two daughters. Jennifer, back to you. What is your reaction to his reaction?
Well, his reaction, just sort of goes, I think it was like, oh my gosh, I've been caught. That's what that looked like to me. And I think people forget that in this day and age, there are video cameras everywhere. Your neighbors have them in their doorbells. They have them security cameras. They're everywhere. So I think that he was experiencing a moment of, oh my gosh, I've been caught. And wow, how stupid was that I did that in front of all my neighbors and all their cameras. It was a really telling moment. And the baby on the screen, oh my gosh, that is heart-wrenching.
Heart-wrenching. And again, the neighbor even said to the officer that he seemed that Chris was being very suspicious. Let's move on to August 15th. So at this point, the investigation is really heating up. And Chris has told law enforcement that he doesn't know where his family is. He also denies having an affair, even though a search of his computer and phone would show otherwise. But the investigators then ask Chris to come down to the police department, and he agrees to a polygraph test. So how'd he do? Watch.
So it was completely clear that you were not honest during the testing, and I think you already know that. You did not pass the polygraph test.
Okay.
Okay. So now we need to talk about what actually happened. And I feel like you're probably ready to do that.
I didn't lie to you on that polygraph, I promise. Chris, I know stuff. It's time.
Even though he's caught lying, he's still adamant that he doesn't know what happened to his wife and kids. But when investigator Tammy Lee, who you just saw there, asks if maybe Shanann hurt the girls, Chris then asks to speak to his father, Ronnie, who was in the other room.
I didn't hear anything. When I was downstairs, I came back up and they were gone. I don't know, like me talking to her about that. Talking to her about separation.
emotion and everything about like she lost. I don't know like what else to say. Like, I freaked out. Those are my kids.
Now, in his first version, or maybe it's his second version, he keeps changing him. He claims that Shanann killed Bella and Celeste, and then he strangled her to death in retaliation. He then says, acting out of fear, he disposed of the bodies at an oil works site where they would ultimately be found.
Dude, I was so scared.
I know.
It's like my wife just did this, Dad just did that. What do I do?
Okay, there's a lot to break down. Kirk, I want to start with you. What do you think about the investigator's technique here to get a confession out of him, particularly having his dad come in?
That was very interesting. So, here there's no expectation of privacy in the interview room. Using the father, especially if someone is, I'll call them an amateur with regards to this type of crime, it's going to be very difficult to lie, look your father in the eye, lie to your father. Clearly, they have a strong relationship because the father did come to the precinct and wanted to get involved. So I think it's a useful technique. This coupled with already letting him know that he failed the polygraph and all these other inconsistencies, I think the investigators probably saw the father being the straw that would break the camel's back here.
And they had really pushed him to confess, and you wonder if he almost wanted to confess. Then again, what we do know is he kind of picked on Agent Tammy Lee's comment about, did Shanann have something to do with this, and jumped with that. We'll later learn that might not be the full story. Now, Jennifer, let me go to you. He failed this polygraph. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I always find it fascinating that people take polygraphs when they're clearly guilty. Polygraphs are set up to measure things that you can't control, like your, respiration, your heart rate, your body temperature, and everything you can do to try to beat a polygraph. We've come up with a way to keep you from being able to do so. So it always surprises me. I just think it's so incredibly stupid to think that you can pass the polygraph when you're clearly lying. So I thought this was an interesting choice by him. And I thought it was interesting they brought the father in on the interview. I've never seen that done, and that was I think really effective.
There's so many moments in this case when you kind of see Chris Watts caught like a deer in headlights. He can't believe he's in this position, and yet he tried to be the innocent person, always being there, always explaining, always having an answer for everything. But as you can see, it doesn't really work out well for him. That interview ultimately led to his arrest. But when we come back, we have a lot to get into. We're going to get into exactly the moment when Chris Watts finally admitted that he killed his kids. We'll be back.
Every time I see pictures of them, I don't know how this could have happened. Being a dad was the best part of my life. I took it all away.
Chris Watts' stories kept on changing. First, it was he didn't know what happened to his missing family. And then he said he killed his wife, Shanann, after she smothered their daughters to death. And then, ultimately, he would confess to murdering them all. Now, 3 months after Chris pled guilty to his crimes and was sentenced to multiple life terms in prison, investigators visited him to get more details of the story. Now, the first thing he says, he describes strangling Shanann to death in a fit of rage after she confronted him about cheating.
I just wish I could have let go.
Did it seem like it was that long, 2 to 4 minutes? How long did it seem for you?
Almost kind of felt like it was longer almost, because it felt like time was standing still. It's kind of like I just saw my life just disappearing before my eyes, but I couldn't let go. It was like somebody else, like if you picture somebody else around you, holding your hands, holding you, keep you from not letting go.
Then he says his 4-year-old daughter walked in.
So what happened next?
Bella came in.
Is that what happened? Bella came in. What'd she say?
Mom.
Did she hear something? Is that what she?
Obviously, I think.
Okay. What'd you tell me?
Mommy don't feel good.
And it only only gets worse from there, because Watts says that he put his girls into the truck, placed their dead mother on the floor of that vehicle, and drove them all out to an oil work site. He then proceeded to murder his 3-year-old daughter, Celeste.
I put the blanket over her head.
And that's how she passed. Couldn't breathe.
I put the blanket over her head. I didn't want to. No. I strangled her right there in the back seat.
And if that wasn't terrible enough, listen to what he claims Bella said as she watched the murder of her sister.
I then went down to Bella. Tell me what happened there.
She said what happened to Cece. First she asked if it was the same thing, the exact same thing that happened to me as Cece.
Did she ask you that? Okay. So Bella's pretty smart. How did she sound when she asked you that, Chris?
She had that soft voice she always had.
Yeah. And what exactly did she say?
She said exactly the same thing that happened to me as Cece. And then I said, I don't even remember what I said.
Okay.
I don't know if I just said yes like a horrible person, or if I just put that blanket over her too and did the same thing.
Same blanket, same way?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
She said, no, Daddy. And that's the last thing she said.
And it doesn't really get worse than that. But unfortunately, the story doesn't end there. Because while Watts sits in prison, he wrote letters to a woman named Sharon Cradle. And she actually published these letters in a book. And in these letters, he goes into what he was thinking. Let's pull some of them up. For example, this is the first one. He writes of Shanann's death. I knew if I took my hands off of her, she would still keep me from Nikki. They asked me why she couldn't fight back. It's because she couldn't fight back. Her eyes filled with blood as she looked at me, and she died. I knew she was gone when she relieved herself. Here's another one. He says, August 12th, when I finished putting the girls to bed, I walked away and said, that's the last time I'm going to be tucking my babies in. I knew what was going to happen that day before, and I did nothing to stop it. Kirk, it seems, again, his stories are changing once more, and that this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment killing, but in fact it was premeditated, that he planned to kill his family because of another woman, right? To start a new life? Is that how you see it?
So when I think of premeditation, I think of someone really planning and thinking, I am going to do this. So I do think that at some point he made up his mind to be predisposed to kill his wife and possibly his children. However, he just couldn't pull the trigger. I think the day of the crime, there was some reason that he just decided that was the day he was going to pull the trigger. But if you look at everything that occurred, this whole plan was ill-conceived. Killing the wife before the children, or deciding how to do this, not necessarily knowing, it showed poor planning. So I think he was predisposed to do this at some point, but I don't think it was a hardcore premeditated plan.
I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, but maybe we'll get a little bit more into that. Jennifer, the truth of the matter is this is a horrific killing, and every killing is absolutely horrific. But here, strangling his wife to death, smothering his kids one by one, having one witness the death of the other. Walk us through that. Walk us through that level of violence, because this, thankfully, is something that we never see a lot of, and I've never quite heard a story quite like this.
Well, in my opinion, a crime like this shows more than just a desire to get out of a marriage or a desire to unencumber yourself from your family. It shows some level of rage and anger and hatred. And he must have worked himself into a condition where he hated his family for keeping him from what he wanted, because it is hard to strangle someone to death. It is hard work. And to do it while looking in his wife's face and then do the same thing to his little innocent baby children, it's just, he must have had such a level of hatred in his heart. I don't know what else to say about that. It's just one of the most horrible things I've ever seen.
And there are times we talk about when someone can switch gears. They can stop what they're doing. They realize he had these moments where he could have stopped what he was doing, and yet he didn't. He kept going forward and going forward and going forward and tried to get away with it. Now, Kirk, as I said, some still believe that this is not the full story. I mean, his stories just keep on changing. Do you believe that Chris Watts is going to be providing more details to come? He's in prison. He's got a lot of time. He can give investigators, the public, his fans, I know there are people writing him letters, love letters. He can give them more details, and it becomes a question if we believe it or not. Do you think we're going to hear more about what happened to Shanann and the kids?
I think it's quite possible because he has so much time on his hands. And as Jennifer stated, which I agree wholeheartedly, this was a crime of rage. And he is now in the process of dealing with so much guilt and having to look at himself every day. I will go as far as to say, if there is more to this crime, we could certainly look forward to hearing about it at some point in time. Maybe next week, maybe next year, but at some point in time, I think he'll come out with it.
And Jennifer, I'll give you about 30 seconds. Are investigators still want to know more answers here?
Well, I mean, it's always interesting when you see a crime like this of a person who seemed very normal, family life, and then he does something so outrageously off the charts, violent and terrible. And so there is that interest in doing research to figure out how they might have seen those signs.
And look, at the end of the day, this is one of those cases that happened in one part of the country, but everybody knew about it, and there's a reason for it. It took people's hearts, it took people's attention, and trying to make sense of what actually happened is what it's all about. Because again, to have an ordinary man just ruin his entire life and kill his entire family, I don't know. And the truth is, we may never get a full answer as to why Chris Watts murdered his wife and kids, but what I do know is that Shanann, Bella, and Celeste will never be forgotten. That's all we have for you on Prime Crime Tonight. Give us your comments on Chris Watts on Twitter and Facebook with the hashtag PrimeCrimeTonight. Thank you for joining us, and until next time, be safe.